Hello, Paula.
Good morning, or good evening, maybe for you.
How are
How are
you?
you? Good, good. How are you doing?
Yeah, welcome to the Global Virtual Summit 2026, Paula.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be
Yeah.
here.
Before going to your session, I would like to introduce you to our audience. Paula
Wonderful.
Anderson is a leadership speaker and transformational strategist, especially in self leadership during times of rapid change. As the creator of the C.O.R.E. upgrade framework, she empowers high achieving women to overcome fear, embrace change, and lead with clarity, confidence, and authenticity. Drawing on nearly 30 years of corporate leadership in the IT sector, and she inspires leaders to transform from the inside out through impactful keynotes, workshops, and coaching. That was the fantastic bio, Paula Anderson, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. So let me share my screen
Yeah.
real quick. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. How many of you feel like the pace of leadership and change has accelerated dramatically over the past few years? And feel free, if this resonates with you, to put something in the chat or give me a thumbs up. Technology, AI, constant restructuring, information overload, and endless demands. Many women leaders today aren't just navigating change anymore, we're navigating acceleration. Based on my experience in corporate leadership and interviews I conducted with women leaders across many different industries, I've come to believe something important. Women leaders aren't losing capability, not even close. They're losing their footing in a rapidly accelerating world. Over the course of almost 30 years, I built a successful career as a corporate IT leader. I love technology, I love building teams, and I love solving difficult problems. And like many women leaders, I believe that if I worked hard enough, became capable enough, stayed adaptable enough, that eventually things would stabilize. Then one Tuesday morning in 2005, I walked into work with my Starbucks coffee in hand, expecting an ordinary day. At the time, I was working as an associate director of technical services for a global hedge fund based out of Chicago. It was my favorite job I had ever had at that point in my career. I loved the culture. I worked with a very tight knit and highly skilled team, and I had formed many close friendships with the people I worked alongside every day. As I approached my desk, my boss was standing there waiting for me. I knew immediately something was wrong. Then he asked if we could talk privately. The company had recently experienced financial losses and needed to downsize. I was instructed to select two members of my 7-person team to be laid off within a month. It was right before the holidays, and there were no good choices. I was totally devastated. I worried about their families and their finances and what this would mean for them personally. I also remember something else. Almost overnight, something shifted, not just in the company, but inside of me. The culture changed, the certainty changed, the feeling of safety changed. And although I didn't realize it at the time, that moment became the beginning of a pattern I would continue to experience throughout much of my career. Layoffs, outsourcing of entire departments, constant executive leadership turnover, pressure to continuously adapt to rapidly changing technology in an industry that never stopped moving. In IT, just when you finally mastered one system, the organization would immediately replace it with another one, which I'm pretty sure is how technology keeps us humble. Even stepping away from corporate for a few years to open a wine bar didn't escape it. Ironically, the pressure there felt even greater. And for years, I believed the problem was me. I thought I needed to become stronger, more resilient, better at handling pressure, better at adapting. But after years of reflection and interviewing women leaders across different industries, I came to realize something. The problem wasn't capability. It was the pressure of trying to stay steady inside of systems that never stopped moving. And I believe many women leaders today are carrying that same pressure, not because they're weak, not because they're failing, but because they're being asked to lead in environments accelerating faster than human beings were designed to process. And that's why I believe one of the most important leadership skills nobody ever taught us is internal footing. Over the last several months, I interviewed women leaders across industries, corporate leaders, entrepreneurs, consultants, and senior executives. Although their roles were different, the patterns were remarkably similar. I'm not sure how to advance my slide. I'm not seeing the button, the option to advance my slide. Would someone be able to help me, please? Even when they felt overwhelmed internally. Many believed that if they stopped holding everything together, that something would fall apart. And what struck me most was this: these were not weak women, they were highly capable women. The issue isn't weakness, the issue isn't resilience, the issue isn't ambition, and the issue certainly isn't capability. In many cases, these women were the most competent people in the room. But competence under pressure has a cost. At first, I thought the answer was simply becoming even more determined. And determination is a wonderful quality. It's what helps us persevere through difficult seasons. It's what allows us to keep showing up even when things are hard. But what I realized is that high performing leaders often confuse determination with control. And for a long time, I believed these were the same thing. However, determination is not the same as control. And that realization changed everything for me. Determination moves you forward. Control convinces you that everything rests on your shoulders. Determination says, I'll keep showing up. Control says, everything depends on me. And when we don't realize the difference, determination slowly becomes pressure. And in turn, pressure begins changing how we see everything. One of the clearest patterns I began noticing was this: leadership clarity decreases as pressure increases, not because intelligence disappears, but because pressure consumes mental and emotional bandwidth. So I began framing it this way: leadership clarity equals mental capacity minus system pressure. The goal isn't to think harder. The goal is to reduce the pressure that's shaping our perception. Most leadership development teaches us how to think better. But what if the real opportunity is learning how to see more clearly? And I didn't just see this in my interviews, I actually lived it myself. In 2016, I started a new role as an IT manager at a large healthcare organization where about 30 engineers reported to me. Over time, I found myself carrying operational leadership, executive communication, personnel issues, major system outages, and a massive data center migration, all at the same time. At one point, I averaged 2 to 3 overnight conference calls every single week for nearly a year. And somehow, we all just started acting like this was a completely normal way for human beings to live. At the time, I normalized it. I told myself, this is leadership. This is responsibility. This is just the cost of the role. But eventually, my body stopped cooperating with the story my mind was trying to maintain. I became completely exhausted, depressed, and physically depleted. I wasn't really living anymore. I was surviving, and honestly, barely surviving. I ended up resigning and had to take 10 months away from work to recover. Months later, I realized something. This wasn't an isolated experience. This was a pattern. At the time, I thought I simply needed to handle pressure better. But looking back, I can see something much more clearly now. Pressure changes perception. And when perception changes, the same situation can look completely different. The facts hadn't changed, my perception had. Once I began looking beneath the surface of those interview responses, I started noticing something else. The women weren't describing a lack of capability, they were describing the effects of sustained pressure. When pressure rises, our attention narrows, urgency increases, perspective shrinks, and our perception changes. Over time, the mind begins believing things as if they're completely true. Things like, everything depends on me. I can't let anyone down. I have to hold everything together. These thoughts don't necessarily appear because reality changed. They appear because pressure changed perception. And if pressure changes perception, then perception becomes one of the most important things a leader can protect. Because perception shapes every single decision that we make. And here's what I've come to believe: internal footing doesn't remove pressure, it helps us see more clearly. When we begin seeing more clearly, we naturally recognize what pressure has been quietly distorting all along. And that's when clarity begins to return. As pressure continues, something subtle begins to happen. Highly capable women don't just experience pressure, they begin carrying it. Not because anyone asked them to, but because they're competent, they're responsible, they're reliable, and they're deeply committed. Over time, urgency becomes carrying, scanning becomes carrying, overfunctioning becomes carrying, until carrying starts to feel completely normal. And many women leaders adapt to these conditions for so long, they mistake adaptation for identity. In my interviews, I noticed women leaders repeatedly stepping into invisible roles, not just leaders, but translators, protectors, buffers, stability anchors, and emotional shock absorbers inside organizations. Many weren't only managing work, they were managing the emotional stability all around them. Over time, I realized I wasn't only carrying operational responsibility, I was also carrying emotional responsibility, trying to keep teams motivated, protecting people from instability, managing reactions, absorbing tension, translating leadership decisions, and holding emotional steadiness for everyone around me. At some point, I realized I wasn't only managing infrastructure anymore. I was managing systems, people, emotions, communications, morale, executive expectations, and apparently the emotional stability of the entire organization. Over time, my role quietly expanded far beyond the job I had actually been hired to do. Organizations often transfer pressure to their most capable people. And one of the hardest things to recognize is that pressure rarely feels like pressure. It usually feels like responsibility, not intentionally, but repeatedly. Because competent people become trusted people, and trusted people become the ones systems lean on, especially during instability. And over time, capable leaders often mistake carrying pressure for being responsible. Those actually are not the same thing. Responsibility helps us respond wisely. Carrying asks us to absorb everything. And it happens so gradually that it simply feels like good leadership. And that's what makes it so difficult to recognize. Over time, many women leaders find themselves inside a pattern that looks something like this. Competence increases, responsibility increases even faster, but support often stays the same or decreases. In fact, every time I became competent at something, the reward seemed to be more responsibility, which some of you may also recognize as the unofficial leadership development model in many organizations. Because these leaders are highly capable, they often continue adapting, and they become so skilled at adapting that at some point the adaptation becomes who they believe they are. As I looked back over my career, I realized something that was a bit surprising. It wasn't just one difficult job, it wasn't just one demanding leader. It was a pattern that followed me from organization to organization. Earlier in my career at another large healthcare organization, I started out in a highly technical leadership role and was promoted several times over the years into larger and larger operational responsibilities. The responsibilities kept accumulating until I was leading a team of over 40 engineers, overseeing critical infrastructure, operations, procurement, vendor contracts, enterprise licensing, and a national data center serving more than 60,000 employees. After I eventually left the organization, they hired a full time employee just to handle the procurement responsibilities I had been carrying alone. At the time, I interpreted this as success, as leadership, as proof that I was capable. But what I understand now is that many women leaders quietly become the stability anchor for increasingly unstable systems. And the pattern repeated again later when I was at DirecTV. I was originally hired to lead a team of 7 engineers responsible for Unix systems and storage infrastructure. Within just 6 months of joining the company, a reorganization doubled the size of my team and expanded my responsibilities to include the Windows infrastructure environment as well. Suddenly, My teams are responsible for the back-end systems supporting the entire organization. The responsibility increased dramatically, but there was no title change, no increase in compensation, no meaningful increase in support, just more responsibility. And I effectively became on call around the clock whenever critical systems went down. But what's important here is this. None of these changes happened all at once. They happened gradually, responsibility by responsibility, expectation by expectation, urgency by urgency, until carrying extraordinary pressure started feeling normal. Eventually, I realized that carrying more wasn't creating greater leadership. It was slowly disconnecting me from myself. And I wondered, what if there's what if the most important leadership skill isn't learning to carry more, but learning how to stay connected to yourself while everything around you keeps moving? That's what I now call internal footing. When I first started using those words, people would often ask me what I meant. Here's the simplest definition I found: remaining connected to yourself while everything around you keeps moving. Because if pressure changes perception, then internal footing helps to protect it. Many of us believe that relaxing requires us to care less. But what if the opposite is true? What if relaxing simply means responding to reality without fighting it? Internal footing isn't stepping away from leadership. It's leading without internally bracing every moment. It isn't becoming passive. It's remaining internally settled while fully engaged. Without internal footing, pressure doesn't just stay outside of us, it begins moving inside. Urgency starts to feel personal. Every problem feels like my problem. Every deadline feels like my responsibility. Every emotion in the room starts becoming something I need to manage. And before we realize it, we stop responding to pressure and we begin absorbing it. Urgency rises, pressure gets absorbed. Eventually, our identity becomes fused with our work. We no longer think, I'm leading under pressure. And we start believing this is just who I have to be if I'm going to be a good leader. And that's when reactivity starts replacing internal leadership. Internal footing doesn't remove pressure, it changes your relationship with pressure. It also helps you recognize the moment determination quietly begins turning into control. And the sooner you notice it, the less pressure you end up carrying. You still care deeply. You still make difficult decisions. You still lead through uncertainty, but you're no longer carrying every single situation inside of yourself. Steadiness begins replacing urgency. Self trust replaces constant self monitoring. Decisions become clearer, not because the environment changed or became easier, but because your perception became clearer. You become more present. Your boundaries become healthier. And perhaps most importantly, you stop confusing carrying everything with leading well. Internal footing isn't stepping away from leadership. It's leading without losing yourself in the process. One of the surprising things about internal footing is that once you experience it, even briefly, you begin recognizing the absence of it much more quickly. You notice when you started absorbing pressure instead of responding to it. You notice when you become entangled in an outcome. You notice when you've drifted away from yourself, not because you've become perfect, but because you've experienced the contrast. I invite you to take a brief moment to notice something. Not analyze, not solve, just notice. Think about something you're deeply committed to right now, a project, your team, a family member, your organization, something that genuinely matters to you. Notice your determination. Notice how much you care. Now, just get curious. Has that determination quietly become pressure? Has healthy responsibility quietly become carrying? Have you begun believing that everything depends on you? And just for a moment, ask yourself a simple question. Is all of it actually yours? Not, should I no longer care? Should I abandon responsibility? Should I stop leading? But instead, am I carrying more than actually belongs to me? What happens if you don't immediately rush to carry it, to fix it, to absorb it, to manage everyone's experience of it, or to solve it instantly? What happens if for just one moment you allow yourself space before reacting? Sometimes better decisions don't come because we thought harder. Sometimes they come because pressure finally loosens its grip and we could see clearly again. Perhaps clarity was never gone. Perhaps it was simply hidden beneath the pressure. And when misunderstanding begins to dissolve, clarity naturally returns. And what I hope you notice is that nothing around you has to change. The pressure may still be there, the responsibility may still be there, the pace of change may still be there. But the moment you stop absorbing all of it immediately, you create space for something important to return. Not because the world became less demanding, but because you became more connected to yourself within it. I believe that's where internal footing begins. Not in perfection, not in controlling everything, not in eliminating pressure, but in remaining connected to yourself while everything around you keeps moving. And in a rapidly accelerating world, that may become one of the most important leadership skills we ever develop. Because the answer may not be learning how to run faster, it may be strengthening the place you stand. The ideas I've shared with you today eventually became the foundation for my work with women leaders through the C.O.R.E upgrade framework. They also became the foundation of an experience I call the internal footing experience. I don't believe leadership is learned in a classroom. I think life is the classroom. It's developed in the moments that matter, the difficult conversations, the impossible deadlines, the moments when we realize we've been carrying more than was ever ours to own. That's when internal footing stops being an idea and becomes your new way of leading. I'll be launching a live virtual 8-week experience in the near future for women leaders who want to continue exploring this work together. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to stay connected. You can scan the QR code here to learn more and be notified when registration opens. My invitation to you today is simple. Notice what you've normalized. Notice what you've been carrying. Notice where pressure may have quietly disconnected you from yourself. And begin asking, what would leadership look like if I no longer had to carry everything alone? Because the greatest leadership advantage isn't thinking harder. Perhaps it's learning to protect the one thing from which every leadership decision flows, our ability to see clearly. When we begin seeing clearly again, we naturally recognize what pressure has been distorting all along, and that's when clarity returns. The world may continue accelerating, but you don't have to lose yourself inside the acceleration. Perhaps the future of sustainable leadership will not belong to the leaders who can carry the most pressure, but to the leaders who can remain the most grounded in the presence of it. Thank you.
Yes, Paula, that was a great presentation. Yeah,
Thank you.
we really enjoyed your presentation. And we have a few questions from our audience. We will directly post it to your email and you can answer there.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Please stay on the backstage and join the next session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.